Will the Menendez brothers walk free? New evidence has surfaced in the Menendez case that could be the key to the brothers being released with time served. The question is, could this new evidence be enough to get the brothers released? Just be forewarned that this two-part series will contain explicit and detailed testimony, involve stories of extreme DV, ABUSC, and SA against minor children. We'll be abbreviating for these words as much as possible to avoid getting flagged by YouTube. We will be going through the crime scene information and go into explicit detail of the investigation and court testimony, some details of which you may never have heard anywhere else. And with that, let's jump into part 2 of the case of the people versus Lyle and Erik Menéndez. The evening of August 20th, 1989 was a hot, peaceful night on North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills, an extremely wealthy area known for its celebrity residents. Nothing bad ever seemed to happen in this quiet, tree-lined street, boasting a row of gated multi-million-dollar mansions up to 10,000 square feet in size. That August night in California was particularly hot, so much so that many residents had their windows open, hoping to catch a breeze in their homes. At around 10 p.m., suddenly several neighbors heard some strange popping sounds cut sharply through the night air. Most neighbors didn't think much of it, assuming that maybe, since it was summer, someone was setting off firecrackers. The popping sounds quickly stopped, and the street went back to being quiet. Suddenly, at 11:47 p.m., a frantic phone call was received by the Beverly Hills Police Department that continues to be one of the worst calls they have ever received. Lyle Menendez, who was 21, was the one who placed the 911 call, while his brother Erik Menendez, 18, cried out loudly in the background.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, dude.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response, 722 North Elm on a parking.
What happened? Hey, stay there, man.
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get students further. Other units responding. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who?
I don't hear anything. I just came home.
You came home and found who shot?
My mom and dad. You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him. Okay, hang on. Let me talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay.
Oh.
Hello, this is police department.
Yes.
Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door and
my brother.
After the call was placed, it only took 2 minutes for the police officers to arrive to 722 North Elm Drive, an elegant 9,000 square foot, 7-bed, 9-bath mansion. After walking around outside of the mansion for several minutes, the police officers heard loud screaming and watched, stunned, as 2 men bursted out of the front door. The men then ran past the officers and through the driveway gate, falling onto their knees in the grass between the sidewalk and the street. The men were yelling things like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." The police were stunned and tried to get more information, but the younger of the two seemed inconsolable, just rolling around in a ball, crying on the grass. This is when neighbors started to really take notice that something was very, very wrong at the Menendez residence. The Menendez family was a family of 4 that had just moved in on the coveted street just a year prior. José, the father, was a 45-year-old executive for live entertainment. José had immigrated from Havana, Cuba in 1959 when he was just 16, as Fidel Castro was overthrowing the government. His parents, celebrity athletes in Cuba, wanted to make sure their son had the chance to be successful by pursuit of the American dream. After José arrived in the U.S., his extremely competitive nature that his parents instilled in him was responsible for him winning a scholarship, a swimming scholarship, to go to college. José rapidly went from living in an attic working as a restaurant dishwasher to being an executive for huge corporations in an array of industries. José worked in the travel industry with Hertz, the record industry with RCA Records, and even the film and entertainment industry with Live Entertainment. His wife, a 47-year-old former beauty queen, was named Mary Louise, who went by Kitty. Kitty and José had met in college when they were young. Kitty had her own aspirations of being in broadcasting. However, she set those dreams aside to be a homemaker and care for their two sons, Lyle and Erik. Erik, the younger of the two boys, had just graduated Beverly Hills High School and had a remarkable talent for tennis, ranking 44th in the U.S. The older brother, Lyle, who also displayed a great talent in tennis, was in college and had just transferred from Princeton University to UCLA just months prior. Startled neighbors began to speculate what could be happening inside the home to be causing the boys to act so erratically outside the home on that August night. Once police entered the mansion, they were absolutely shocked to see one of the most horrific and gruesome scenes any of them had ever and would ever see for the rest of their lives. As they inched through the front door of the residence straight across the foyer into a room known as the den, they immediately saw what looked like blood and body parts everywhere. As they got closer, they saw the white couch was soaked red with blood, and sitting on it was the deceased body of José Menendez.
We're at 722 North Elm Drive, a reported double homicide. Present at the scene are Detectives Zoller, myself, and Lenahan.
As they walked further into the den, they could then see the mutilated and bloodied body of Kitty Menendez lying on the floor horizontally between the coffee table and the couch. At that time, the Beverly Hills Police Department would only see maybe 1 or 2 homicides a year, so not only were the officers shocked because they didn't have to see many things like this, but they were also not very used to investigating crime scenes like this. One of the officers even said that the bodies had no resemblance of what you would expect a human being to look like because their bodies were so distorted. It appeared pretty obviously that a shotgun had been used, but that oddly, somebody must have picked up all the casings. Detectives were called who initially believed that the scene was so gruesome that it had to be perpetrated by mobsters. They theorized that maybe José's business rivals, who may have had a grudge, had done it. Also, it was pretty well known that José wasn't very well liked. Also, it was said that Live Entertainment might be starting to produce adult films, so maybe the mob, who were known to produce their own adult films, didn't want this sort of affecting their bottom line. That night, police questioned the brothers at the scene and then brought them into the station for more questioning. It was said that officers really immediately felt bad for these boys. Even though they were, adults, they really felt bad that these boys just walked in to see their parents dead, and they were extremely distraught. When they questioned the boys, it was more to see if they could gather more information on the actual crime scene itself than if they were really considering them suspects. While they weren't considered suspects at first, police were aware that the summer before they had both been caught burglarizing homes. The boys also indicated to police that they were now terrified about who could have done something like that, worried that maybe somehow they were also an intended target as they were supposed to be home that night. When police asked the brothers about their timeline that night, the brothers both had this same story that they told police that they had driven to the movies together to see the latest Bond film called License to Kill. But they said the line was too long for that, so they saw Batman instead. Afterward, they said they went to the annual Taste of LA festival in Santa Monica and then returned home just before midnight. They said they noticed right away that the front driveway gate was wide open, which was a little strange. Then, as they arrived to the front door, they were a little surprised that the front door was unlocked. They explained to the officers that since they had moved into the home a year ago, their mother refused to give them keys, so they would have to knock on the door and ring the doorbell, and then their mother would have to let them in. So they thought it was a little odd that the door wasn't locked. Then the boys told police. When they walked into the home, they were extremely dumbfounded because they smelled something that smelled like gunfire, and they noticed that the house had traces of gray smoke. This is when they looked for their parents, and when they walked into the den of the home, discovered the most shocking scene they could have imagined. Their parents appeared shot dead. They said that Lyle immediately called the police as Erik screamed. During the questioning, Erik was so upset that he could barely speak. After 20 minutes, the police had to stop the questioning because he was just crying uncontrollably. Lyle, on the other hand, was a lot more composed and able to actually answer more questions. It was Lyle who was actually reinforcing the mob idea to the police, reinforcing the whole idea that maybe it had something to do with money in José's job. He theorized that maybe Live wanted insurance money, since maybe big corporations get insurance money on their executives. Maybe they wanted the money. The boys were soon sent back to the home where police were asked to guard the property to make sure nothing would happen to them. Once the police began their investigation, one thing that became really clear right away was that José had some major enemies, and the consensus seemed to be that José was one of the more ruthless and competitive people that anyone had ever met.
José Menendez is chairman of the board, president, and chief executive officer of Live Entertainment, joining us here in Los Angeles. And I should point out, this is the company, folks, that brings you the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video, which seriously is a hot video right now.
It is. So the company is broad-based, and it provides pretty much what the consumer wants.
Mm-hmm. And you must have projections for down the road what you're expecting to make at some point.
Well, we think 1989 will be a tremendous year.
Co-workers, family, friends would describe to police that José was beyond controlling and manipulative. José showed time and time again that he believed that cheating was okay in order to get ahead, and he had no problem destroying whoever he had to in order to get what he wanted. When the autopsy results came in, it would reveal that José was shot at point-blank range in the back of the head and was struck 3 more times in the arms and legs. It was said that the hole in his head was the size of a fist, as were the other wounds. His brain had been pulverized, and there was also what was described in the report as a deformity of the face caused by multiple fractures of the facial and jaw bones. The autopsy report also said that soot was found in the wound, which would mean that when the shot to José's head was fired, the gun had been put up against the back of his head. There was also 2 shots to the right arm, one below the shoulder, which fractured the humerus, and the other to the right forearm, as well as a shot to his left elbow. It appeared that the trajectory of the shot was from back to front, indicating to investigators that this was probably the first shot fired as the killer walked around to the front of the couch. José was also shot in the lower left knee, creating a 3-inch wound. The autopsy also showed that there was still bleeding to José's body tissues along his wounds, which meant that his heart was pumping blood, which made investigators think that the wound to the back of the head, which was initially thought to have been the first shot, may have actually been the final shot. And Kitty's autopsy was awful as well. It showed that she had been shot in her left cheek, which caused a 1-inch hole that fractured her upper jaw and dislodged 4 of her upper teeth. She also had fractures to her lower jaw and pellet wounds to her tongue. A shot had also lacerated her brain. The pathologist found birdshot in her wounds, which would appear that the killer may have reloaded their weapons since none of José's wounds contained birdshot. Kitty's most damaging wound was 4 inches, which extended from Kitty's right cheek across her nose to her left cheek. Kitty's thumb was also blown off, which indicated that Kitty may have put up her hand to block some of the shots. Kitty also had shotgun wounds to her right forearm, left chest, as well as 3 wounds to her left leg. The final wound was to her left knee, which appeared to go from front to back. Investigators thought this was a little odd because it came from an entirely different angle than the other shots fired at her leg. After the autopsy results came in, it only further made police think that it was most likely a mob hit since it was so violent. Although the crime scene of the den was messy, it appeared that the room was just cluttered. It's not like it was the result of a room that had been ransacked because there was a robbery. But as the police dug more and more into the mob theory, it didn't quite add up. Apparently, mob hits are more likely to be 1 or 2 shots, nothing like this. This was described as being completely overkill times 100. So most of the times with organized crime, they are only after one person, and thus they would have likely let Kitty live. It was starting to get more and more clear that the killer most likely knew the victims. After investigators moved past the mob theory, investigators dug into the theory that perhaps Live Entertainment had tried to kill José in order to collect insurance money, because after all, they would have gotten $15 million. But that search also wound up just being another dead end. Meanwhile, as police worked to find the killers, the boys did something a little odd that was just a bit of a red flag for police. Very shortly, just days after their parents died, the boys arranged to have a computer expert erase the hard drive of their mother's computer. One of Lyle's friends told police that the boys were attempting to make sure there were no other wills on the computer that would exclude them. But it was just one thing, so police shelved it and kept investigating. Meanwhile, the brothers kept living their lives. They arranged an elaborate memorial service for their parents, and Erik, it was said at the service, was too upset to really speak, but Lyle seemed much more composed. They looked into the life insurance policy of their parents and even met with Live executives, only to find out that the $5 million life insurance policy that they thought they had through Live had not yet been completed since their father had not yet had his physical examination. That said, the boys did receive $650,000 from José's personal life insurance policy just 4 days after the murders. They decided that they no longer wanted to really spend any time living in the mansion, and after all, who could blame them? Most people knew that their parents had just died there. They also told friends that they were terrified to sleep there since they weren't sure who was out to get them. The boys started to stay at hotels for a while, and Live actually picked up the $8,000 tab and paid for the boys to have limos and bodyguards. So the brothers rented adjoining apartments in the Marina City Towers in Marina del Rey. Lyle's rent was about $21.50 a month, and Erik's was $24.50. The boys also began paying for their own bodyguards and limos. They started to furnish the apartments. They were buying expensive furniture, appliances, as well as a $64,000 Porsche, $24,000 in stereo equipment, and several Rolex watches. Lyle also purchased a restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey called Chuck's Spring Street Cafe for $550,000, since it was a long-time dream of his to own a restaurant. But the restaurant began losing money. Erik also had lost money too. He tried to sponsor a rock concert with a partner, but the partner ran off with his money. Erik then decided he wanted to just focus on tennis, so he hired a private coach for $60,000 a year. Now, some friends definitely noticed that the boys seemed to be throwing money around, but they just chalked it up to the fact that the boys had come from extreme wealth, and it was normal for them to get whatever they wanted. In fact, in late October of 1989, the police went to interview Erik again in Beverly Hills. Erik told police he was frustrated with how much money his brother Lyle was spending. He also told police that Lyle seemed to be manipulating him in order to get his share of half of the money, something that he said reminded him of how his father was, or what his father would have done. It was after this interview, Erik said he was really shaken by the police. He immediately called his brother, who was in Princeton at the time, and when he didn't answer, Erik called his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. Now, the year prior, Erik and Lyle had gotten themselves into trouble burglarizing homes with friends. Their lawyer worked out a deal that Erik would take the fall since he was a minor, but part of that deal meant that Erik would have to start seeing a court-appointed therapist, Dr. Oziel. So, Erik visited Dr. Oziel on October 31st, 1989. In that therapy session, Erik told Dr. Oziel that he wanted to leave the office and take a walk because he wanted to tell him something. Dr. Oziel and Erik strolled around Beverly Hills in a park-like area as Erik discussed his parents and his depressive thoughts and thoughts to unalive himself. And as they walked back towards Oziel's office, Erik made a shocking admission to his therapist as he leaned up against a parking meter, which was right outside his therapist's office, and he just said, "We did it." Which prompted Oziel to say, "Kill your parents?" Erik responded yes. Now, Erik went on to tell Dr. Oziel about a miniseries called Billionaire Boys Club and how he and his brother had watched it together recently. And after they watched it, they talked about how their father, José, was planning to disinherit them from his will because of their delinquent behavior recently. Plus, they were really fed up about how manipulative, cruel, and controlling their father had always been. This was when he told Dr. Oziel that they had first began to think about killing their father. Erik told Dr. Oziel that the reason why they really killed their father is because they couldn't live with him anymore because he was so overbearing and controlling. They didn't want to kill their mother, but they weren't sure how that would work not to kill her because their mother would have, one, been a witness, number two, they didn't think she could even survive without José, and number three, she had been so victimized that she was so suicidal, they thought it was probably better off just to put her out of her misery. As they waited for Lyle, Erik continued to explain how they traveled to San Diego to buy the shotguns, and he explained how they carefully cleaned up all the casings and that they didn't need to worry about DNA since they lived at the home. Erik told Dr. Oziel that after they cleaned up the weapon evidence, they drove to Mulholland Drive and pulled to a stop there, and Erik flung the shotguns into a canyon after waiting for traffic to clear the area. Erik continued to say that they made their way to a gas station where they threw the shot casings and the bloody clothes and shoes into a dumpster. They then made their way home because at this point Erik was completely falling to pieces emotionally, so they drove home and called the police. It was after he finished explaining this story that Lyle burst into Dr. Oziel's office completely furious that Erik was telling the therapist all of this information. Lyle told Dr. Oziel that he thought their father might actually be proud that they carried out such a successful crime. Dr. Oziel then said that he felt threatened by the way Lyle was talking to him, as if he was threatening his life if he were to tell anybody the truth that the boys did it. Now, in the state of California, there are laws in place that say that patients, even if they confess to killing someone, are protected with a patient-therapist confidentiality barrier. However, Lyle, seemingly threatening Dr. Oziel, could have been technically immediately reported to the police by Dr. Oziel. However, Dr. Oziel did not report them. Instead, he decided to start recording them, something that is actually illegal to do without the consent of a patient. So they would go on to have several other sessions that were being recorded. Meanwhile, one of Erik's good friends, Craig Signorelli, had called into the police tip line to say that recently he had visited Erik at the Beverly Hills mansion, and Erik had asked Craig if he wanted to know how it happened. Craig said he immediately knew what it meant, and just a year prior, Craig told police that him and Erik spent a great deal of time together and wrote a screenplay entitled Friends, and the script was a 62-page thriller about a son from a wealthy family who reads his parents' will and learns upon their death he will inherit $157 million. After Craig told the police about the screenplay, he told them Erik said on the night of the killings he and Lyle had come home to get his fake ID. And as Erik was walking outside toward the car after finding his ID, Lyle kind of met up with him with these two shotguns and said, "Let's do it." Craig claims that the plan was for Lyle to shoot José and Erik to shoot Kitty. Erik had told him that after they entered into the den, Lyle did shoot José with the gun. Then Lyle shot José in the head from behind. Erik told Craig that he was actually unable to shoot his mother and that when she tried to get away, Lyle was who shot her. Craig remembered that Erik said, "After it looked like my mom was dead, I shot her twice with my gun." However, at the end of recounting the story, Craig told the detectives that he didn't know for sure if this story was true since him and Erik often played mind games with each other where they would tell each other a story and then they would just look at each other and say, "It could have happened." So this made the detectives pause because maybe it wasn't a real confession. Maybe he was just kind of messing around with his friend. The police met with the Los Angeles DA, who told them they didn't yet have enough evidence to file criminal charges, but they suggested that maybe Craig try and speak to Erik again wearing a wire. Craig agreed to assist the police and met with Erik for dinner on November 29, 1989. However, at the dinner, Erik told Craig that he had been kidding and that he and Lyle had nothing to do with it. But police weren't necessarily convinced and taking the word of Erik this time. They didn't think that Craig would have wasted his own time if he didn't think that something was really wrong. So investigators decided to pull a list of shops selling shotguns in the Los Angeles area, but the list was well over 80 pages long, but their names were not found on the list. The police realized they could have had a friend buy the guns, but nothing was sticking out. But suddenly on March 5th, 1990, there was a major break in the case that would shock everyone. A woman named Judalon Smith called with a tip that she knew of a therapist that had recordings where Erik Menendez admitted that him and his brother killed their parents. Apparently this woman was the angered mistress of Dr. Oziel. Judalon told police that on Halloween, Oziel had asked her to listen in on a therapy session he was having with the Menendez brothers. She claimed that she heard Lyle and Erik yelling at each other, and that Lyle yelled to Erik, "I can't believe you told him," and then Lyle said, "We're going to have to kill him and anyone associated with him." Erik's response, according to Judalon's statement, was that he said, "I can't stop you from what you have to do, but I can't kill anymore." Erik sobbed as he raced out of the office, ending the session. And just a few days later, on March 8th, the police obtained a search warrant for Dr. Oziel's tapes. And in listening to all 17 of those audio tapes, police were able to finally piece together what truly happened to José and Kitty. The police weren't sure they could even use these tapes as evidence due to the patient-therapist confidentiality barrier, but they took them in regardless and figured that the court would have to just rule on it. Now the police were moving forward with arrests. They were particularly concerned that Lyle might try to flee the state, and they wanted to arrest the boys together. However, Erik was currently in Israel for a tennis tournament. So on March 7th at around 1 p.m., as Lyle was driving his Jeep with friends to lunch, he noticed that at the end of the street, down the street from the North Elm Drive mansion, there was a police car with flashing lights parked across the south end of the street. Lyle stopped just short of hitting it and went into reverse, crashing into a van that had driven right up behind the Jeep to block him. Police were suddenly everywhere and began yelling, "Get out of the Jeep!" So Lyle and his two friends stepped out of the Jeep, and Lyle was handcuffed and taken away. Later that same afternoon, the Los Angeles DA held a news conference.
Today at approximately 1:20 p.m., Beverly Hills police detectives arrested Joseph Lyle Menendez, 22, for the August murders of his mother and father, Maria Louise Kitty Menendez and José Enrique Menendez. His brother, Erik Galen Menendez, 19, also wanted for the same crimes, is being sought, is believed to be out of the country. This arrest follows a nearly 7-month investigation that began on August 20th, 1989, when Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were found savagely shotgunned to death in the family room of their home at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills. Joseph, who goes by his middle name, Lyle, was arrested in the city of Beverly Hills as he attempted to drive away from his home. He offered no resistance and was taken into custody without incident. He is being held without bail at Los Angeles County Jail pending his arraignment. Erik Menendez is believed to be in Israel and is being sought by detectives of this department with the assistance of the Israeli government, the U.S. State Department, and Interpol. A warrant for his arrest is, of course, being obtained. Perhaps this is an organized crime hit. There are a lot of theories. And so we started off with complete objectivity in mind, but as we continued our investigation, which I might add was conducted by these detectives here round the clock for these 7 months, the focus became very clear on these two sons. And I might say that over the months we've gathered a lot of evidence. It has been very circumstantial, and we were waiting for the glue, if you will, to bind it all together. And just recently that glue has come about, and I feel that we have a very tight case indeed. Well, unfortunately, the investigation is still proceeding. The case is quite a ways from trial, and so I can't get too definitive at this point. It would be inappropriate.
The spokesman said that the police became aware that there was a conversation between Lyle and his brother with a psychiatrist after the killing. Is that true?
I would not want to comment on that.
Why would the DA have said it if it wasn't true?
The DA can say whatever he wants to say. We have a case ongoing here, and I don't want to take any chance on jeopardizing it.
What about a motive?
Well, the motives, of course, are varied. It's no big secret that the Menendezes had an estate that was worth millions of dollars.
How many millions?
And then, of course, who knows what really goes on within a family. Yes, ma'am.
How many millions of dollars?
Well, there have been various reports, 10 to 17 million, and of course, we haven't confirmed that.
Chief, you say you never know what goes on within a family. I mean, obviously, your detectives done a lot of talking. What do you think was going on?
Well, I don't think it'd be appropriate to speculate on that. As all I know is that, as in any family, there are a lot of conflicts, and you asked me a question about the motive, and frankly, I don't know if there was a sole motive or several motives.
When this news broke, the Menendez family was pretty much still on the side of the boys. I mean, both Kitty's family and Jose's family. Many of them had a really hard time believing the boys could have ever done something like this.
You believe strongly in the boys' innocence?
Extremely. You cannot imagine how strongly I believe in that. I don't have words to say how strong I feel about the complete impossibility of them having committed the act that they're accused of.
But at the same time, many of them knew that the boys had grown up under very controlling circumstances. However, it was said that the family said of Erik that he was the type of brother that would follow his brother Lyle to hell, even if it meant leaving heaven to do so. After Erik was made aware of Lyle's arrest, it was said that he was crying hysterically when he found out. He called an uncle who recommended he turn himself in. Erik then flew to Miami to meet his Aunt Marta, and together they flew to Los Angeles, where the police immediately took Erik into custody. Now that the brothers were arrested, the police had to find evidence aside from the Oziel tapes, which they weren't sure they could even use yet. Then the police heard from Judalon, Dr. Oziel's mistress, that the boys had said that they had purchased those shotguns in San Diego. So when the police honed in on the San Diego gun stores, they finally hit on a name they remembered, which was associated with Lyle, Donovan Gaudreau, the friend he had at Princeton who thought he had misplaced his driver's license. It turns out that Lyle found a sneaky way to get use out of it. Police verified that Donovan had a rock-solid alibi at work during the time the gun was purchased, and the signature on the purchase slip also looked nothing like Donovan's real signature. Investigators had finally found a solid link of evidence between the murder weapon and the boys that they knew that they could use in court. The brothers' family retained very good and very pricey legal counsel for both Erik and Lyle. Leslie Abramson for Erik and Jill Lansing for Lyle. And on March 26, 1990, the brothers were arraigned for the murders of their parents at the Beverly Hills Municipal Court. Bystanders and reporters noted that the boys seemed very aloof, smug, and emotionless during the arraignment. The judge explained to them that they were being accused of murder in the first degree for killing for financial gain and that they may get the death penalty.
You are charged in count 1 with a violation of Penal Code Section 187A, murder of José Menendez, a human being, for financial gain while lying in wait with a firearm. You are further charged in count 2 with a violation of Penal Code Section 187A, murder of a Maria Menendez, a human being, for financial gain while lying in wait with a firearm. You are further charged with special circumstances for which you could be sentenced to death.
The boys both pleaded not guilty. Now, the issue of the audio tapes being admissible in court went all the way up to the California Supreme Court. They argued for over 2 years back and forth with appeals, since there is a law protecting patient-therapist privilege and says that even in situations where a killer confesses to the therapist, if they murdered someone, that they can't say anything. If the therapist goes to the police, they can be sued for malpractice. The issue was there was a claim that the boys had, in fact, threatened the life of Dr. Oziel. On June 4th, 1992, the California Supreme Court heard arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, and it was decided that only one tape was not barred by the patient-therapist privilege because Dr. Oziel believed it was during that session that Lyle had threatened him. Now that the final decision was made that the tape was admissible, they were ready for trial. Since it was pretty clear that the boys had already admitted to the killings, the only angle the defense had was to aim for manslaughter. Now, in the early 1990s, Court TV had just started, and they had asked the judge if the trial could be televised. The judge, who was the same judge for the Rodney King trial, agreed that cameras were okay in the courtroom. The trial began on July 20th, 1993, with the attention of the entire nation.
When the trial of Lyle and Erik Menéndez begins later today, they will attempt to put the character and reputation of their murdered parents on trial. One prosecutor is accusing the defense team of, quote, blatant character assassination.
Already the trial has drawn national media attention with scores of camera crews vying for interviews.
Gentlemen, you're really obstructing us now.
Interestingly, with this trial, there were 2 separate juries and 2 separate defense attorneys simultaneously in the same courtroom. The prosecution's main argument was that the boys killed for money. They had proof that the boys went on a massive spending spree after they got access to their father's money. And not only that, it was said that Lyle told his therapist his uncle had suspected another will existed on the family computer, which would have disinherited the boys. So they arranged to have that computer erased to avoid that possibility. The prosecution argued it was this action that further proved that they were after money. But the defense argued that the boys were being told constantly that they were disinherited, that friends had heard the parents say this to them, and that the uncle had told them about the other will, which is what they tried to delete.
I believe you indicated that when you came to California after Kitty and Jose died, a will was found on either Wednesday or Thursday. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And someone else found the will but told you about it. Is that correct?
Yes.
And after that will was found, did you continue looking for another will?
Yes, ma'am.
And why was that?
Because of the conversations I had had before with him. to the effect that he was in the process of writing a new will.
So the conversations were that he was in the process of writing the new will. Now, with regard to his statements about the boys and what their knowledge was, did you say that he had? What did he tell you the boys believed about whether they were in or out of the will?
That he had told.
What did he tell you he had told the boys?
That he had told boys that they were no longer in the will.
Okay. And these conversations were end of '88, beginning of '89, and then another one early summer?
Well, that particular one was only the second conversation, which was early summer.
Okay, that he'd already told them they were out of the will.
Yes.
And after you found the old will in the house, you then went to the bank still looking for a new will. Is that correct?
That is correct.
After you found the old will, in addition to going to the bank, to the safety deposit box looking for a new will, what other efforts did you make to find the new will you believed existed?
I contacted every attorney that I became aware of that had any contacts with Jose.
Did you ever find a new will?
No, I did not.
With regard to the reference to the will and the computer, you said that you believed that such a will, if it existed, wouldn't be valid. Is that correct?
That was my belief, yes.
Okay. And you expressed that belief in front of Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And that was in California?
I believe I had a couple of conversations in which I expressed that belief, but perhaps even both in California as well as New Jersey.
I believe you indicated that you had a meeting with the people from Live Entertainment.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And was there some discussion regarding a $5 million insurance policy?
Yes, there was.
And what was that?
There was a clause in Jose's employment contract which provided for a $5 million life insurance contract. We brought that up to the company, and the company said that there would have been, had Jose taken a physical examination, but that he had not done that.
Were there any comments made by any members of the family with regard to whether Jose Menendez had taken the physical or not?
Yes, it seems that a couple of people knew about that.
Who knew about that?
I understand Lyle and also Lyle's grandmother.
Knew that Jose had not taken the physical?
Yes.
The defense also argued that these boys were so wealthy that these spending sprees were really nothing out of the ordinary. They had always known a life where they could get anything they wanted, whenever they wanted, and it was nothing to get a $60,000 car or spend $5,000 on watches.
I mean, obviously your parents had money and they spent it on you and your brother, but the thing that got everyone's attention was the spending spree after they died. You know, the Rolexes and the Porsche and the tennis coach.
I get it, yeah.
So explain that. Why did you guys go on that spending spree?
I think it's characterized as a spending spree because they condense it into how much money did you spend after your parents died. But at the trial, it was very clear that this was a family that sort of just spent money like water before. I had spent a huge amount of money before, as all the family members did. We didn't really think about money. It was a wealthy family that spent money on, a lot of things. So money corrupts the narrative of it, and it just, there's a sense that, okay, wealth means greed, and that must always be the motive for everything. And it's not.
It also would have been pretty short-sighted of them to kill their father for only $650,000 when he was worth far more than that if they had just waited a week for him to get the policy with Live Entertainment signed.
Mrs. Bozanich asked you your opinion about one of the prosecution theories. Are you aware that money is one of the motivations that they have propounded?
Yes. I just don't find it credible. I mean, these kids had money before There didn't seem to be controls put on them on how much money they spent. They were going to have money. I think it was pretty clear that they knew that they were out of the will. I suppose you could argue, actually, if something had happened to the parents, they might have less money than they had if the parents were alive.
You were asked about Lyle's pattern of spending money after his parents died. Was there any pattern with regard to these purchases and how they took place that you thought was significant?
Yes. Before he actually spent money, he asked for advice from an uncle or a bodyguard or someone else, almost as if to ask permission or is it okay?
What was the significance of that?
Well, I think it shows ambivalence. I think it's consistent with spending as a grieving process, a kind of nurturing, kind of giving to self, trying to deal with grief.
Was he the type of person, in your opinion, who made decisions himself or who always had decisions made for him?
I think he was the type of person that had all significant decisions and many insignificant decisions made for him.
And would this be consistent with that pattern as well?
Yeah.
Instead, the defense claimed there was a completely different motive for the killings that would truly rattle everyone watching. That the brothers had committed the crime in self-defense.
The defense will claim the boys were abused by their parents. One defense attorney has told the judge she plans to use a self-defense strategy.
We have evidence that will prove that they were experiencing fear, that they were in imminent danger of death or great bodily injury at the hands of their parents.
Attorneys for the Menendez boys say they will use the same defense employed for battered women. Homicide is self-defense.
The defense claimed they were in constant fear of their father because he'd threatened to kill them if they told anyone about the years of SA they both suffered since they were children at the hands of their father. Interestingly, a few months after the arrest, Lyle had written a letter to Erik, pleading for him not to talk about any family ABUSC, more specifically the SA, or the real reason why they killed their parents. Lyle was wanting all of it to stay a secret, he said, because he was so deeply embarrassed by it all. However, Lyle claims a consultant on the case told him that he had worked with many children, many adult children, that weren't in situations where they were SA'd by their parents. And he said to Lyle, don't be one of those kids on death row before they actually talk about what really happened to them. Lyle said it was that statement that triggered him to change his mind and tell his attorneys he wanted to talk openly about what his father was doing to them at trial. After the killings, the brothers claimed they could not discuss the SA with anyone because they were truly embarrassed. Lyle was questioned on the stand first, and it was his testimony that took the world by surprise first. He claimed that the SA from his father started as early as 5 or 6.
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. It began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
He used objects.
What kind of objects?
A toothbrush and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions, and just slide my pants down or take my pants off. Sometimes it would be for a short period of time, sometimes longer. Just lay me on the bed and he'd have a tube of Vaseline and he just played with me.
And was there some point in time when he decided to use something besides the toothbrush?
Yes.
And did he try to anally penetrate you with something else?
He did.
And what was it?
I'm sorry. I just told him that I didn't want to do this and that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
What did your mom say?
She told me to stop it and that I was exaggerating.
Did you ever tell anybody else when you were a child? You heard Diane Vandermolen testify. Do you
Yes.
remember telling her?
No.
Did you complain to your cousin Alan?
No, not about that.
Just about punishment. As a child, did you ever tell anybody else what had happened with your dad?
Yes. As a child, no.
Why not?
I was afraid, and my dad didn't want me to.
What did he tell you about telling people?
He just said that it was, and I told him I never would.
It stopped for you with your dad when you were 8. When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Erik.
And did you do something about it?
Yes.
What did you do?
I talked to my dad.
What did you say to your dad?
I told him that I knew what was going on with him and Erik, and I heard noises, and that I wanted him to leave Erik alone.
And sadly, Lyle didn't only implicate his father. Lyle also described S.A. with his mother as well.
Would she ask you how she looked?
Yes.
And sometimes when she asked you how she looked, would she be inappropriately attired?
She would be topless. Usually just topless or like an open robe. And sometimes, with her clothes on.
And what ages are you talking about where she would expose herself to you this way?
Objection, the question was leading and mischaracterizing the testimony.
Overall. I was about 11.
She help you with your baths?
Yes.
How would she help you with your baths?
She would come in after I'd been in there a while. She would help wash my hair and wash me with a sponge.
How old are you talking about?
Same, 11 to 11 to 13.
And when you say she would wash you with the sponge, would she just wash your back or?
No. She would wash me everywhere.
She would wash your genitals?
Yes.
You slept in bed with your mom a lot, didn't you, even when you were little?
Yes.
And did you continue to sleep in her bed around this time when you're 11 and 12?
Sometimes.
And sometimes, did you touch your mom?
Yes.
Would your dad be in bed?
Sometimes.
And where would you touch her?
Everywhere.
Did she touch your back?
She kissed me, but she didn't touch me.
And how long did these things go on for?
Until I was 13, a little bit farther than that.
And when this was going on with your mom, was she nicer to you than she used to be?
No. She was worse.
And did it stop at some point?
It stopped a few months after I was 13.
Who stopped it?
I did.
How did she react to that?
She was furious and, she couldn't be too much worse, but she harassed me and we just sort of had arguments about and problems about that for a long time, a couple of years.
Was your
Really for my whole life, because it came out in other ways too.
Your relationship with your mother was never good before that, is that correct?
No.
Was it worse after that?
Oh yeah, she was just, she was pretty much zeroed in on me after that. Very, I don't know, she felt rejected. I don't know what she felt exactly, but it was a constant attacking.
Were you angry with her also?
Was I angry? I was very angry. I thought that it was unfair.
Why was it unfair?
Because we were doing this and she was enjoying it, and I was hoping that things were going to get better for our whole relationship, and things might get better, and she got worse.
Did you think she was going to love you if you did these things?
I took it to be love, and that's what I wanted.
Did you always have problems with her after that about your girlfriends?
I always had problems with her with my girlfriends, yes.
And after all of this stopped with your mother, did she show you specifically that she was unhappy that it had stopped, or she was angry about it?
She harassed me.
What do you mean she harassed you?
She just kept exposing herself, picking me up at the clubs with, in a robe, exposed, leaving her underwear around, calling me into the room when she knew that she was, changing, asking me if she looked pretty, and called me a liar when I said yes. Sometimes she would be in a tantrum, and then she would come over and she would touch my face real gentle, like she was going to kiss me, and then she would go back into a rage.
Lyle even admitted on the stand that he too had SA'd his little brother, Erik, in the same way with a toothbrush in the woods when they were little. He says because it was behavior that he had learned from his father.
So during the time between 6 and 8, when this was going on, did you tell your brother? Did you do something to your brother?
Yes.
What did you do to your brother?
I took him out to the woods whenever I felt, I don't know, I took him out sometimes, and I took a toothbrush also.
Then it was Erik's turn to take the stand, and he reinforced the idea that their father was as wicked as the court had just heard.
Now, at some point, did your father stop being nice?
Yes.
Approximately how old were you?
I was 11 years old. It was just after I finished swimming. I just didn't know. It was real confusing. He sat down with me, and he came over to me, and he said, "What sport do you want to play? You have to choose a sport." Because I blame myself. I thought maybe he wanted me to do swimming, but at the time I thought he wanted me to choose tennis because Lyle had gone into it.
Now, what was it, Mr. Menendez, that happened that made you think that your father was upset with you for having given up swimming?
He wasn't nice anymore during the sex.
You have to put the mic in.
He wasn't nice anymore during the sex.
Now, do you recall the first time that he wasn't nice during the sex?
Yes. Yes.
And you were 11?
I was 11.
Erik went into full detail that the real motive came about a week before the killings. He had just graduated high school earlier that year and got into UCLA and was very excited to move out of the house and on campus. He was moving into a dorm and totally excited to finally have freedom from his father. He felt like he would have a chance to thrive away from his father's tyranny, and he'd finally be able to avoid his father coming into his room at night. However, to his dismay, Erik claimed that his father told him he would be required to come back home to their Beverly Hills home several nights a week so he could supervise his homework. Erik claimed he knew what that meant. It meant more SA from his father at night. Erik testified that it was this revelation that sent him into a depressive tailspin of hopelessness. He said it made him feel like everything he had ever been excited for, his freedom after turning 18, would still be impossible with a father like José. To him, he said, it was even weirder because his mother specifically wanted both boys out of the house so that their father would focus on her again. Kitty had been in an emotional tailspin lately for years, was drinking more and more and taking pills and acting erratic after years of being under José's control, and most especially after she discovered her husband had numerous long-term affairs, and she was hoping to get closer to him now that the boys would be leaving. Just 2 days after that, Erik testified he witnessed an angry confrontation between his mother and brother, during which Kitty, his mother, yanked off Lyle's hairpiece in one swoop. Things truly seemed to be falling apart and hitting a crisis point in the home. It was at that point, Erik said, he finally took Lyle aside and told him the truth, that José had been SAing him since he was 5. This is when both brothers said they realized it had happened to both of them. Lyle, being the older brother who already had more freedom, promised Erik he would confront their father, threatening that he stop the essay or they tell somebody. 2 days after that, Erik said Lyle did stand up for him. He confronted José and threatened to reveal the family secret unless José stopped the essay immediately. Lyle then claimed José responded he would do what he wanted in his house.
I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world that you could possibly do is to threaten Dad.
Now, what was the nature of the threat as you understand it from what Lyle told you?
Just that if Dad ever touched me again, that Lyle would tell everyone.
And why did it concern you that he had said that?
Because you don't go and threaten Dad, and especially what Dad had just done to me. I couldn't believe it.
All right, how did you think your father would react to a threat to expose him publicly as a child molester?
He would not react well.
What does that mean?
He would kill you. He would not permit you to do that.
Was your father a person concerned with his public image?
Yes.
Later that night, Erik testified that his father was banging on the door, screaming at him for telling Lyle. José was not the type of man who would take threats from his children. Even more upsetting, it was after this incident that Erik claimed Kitty had finally admitted to him that she had actually known about the abuse. He claimed he tried to tell her for years since he was a child, and his mother would always reply that he was imagining it, or it really wasn't as bad as it was. This, Erik said, hurt him more than anything else. He said he felt like his mother was enabling José instead of helping her children. It was that same night, Erik said, that he and his brother began to think their parents would kill them in order to eliminate the threat of the awful family secret getting out. He said that he and Lyle stayed awake all night discussing whether to go to the police, to talk to relatives, or to get weapons. They knew their parents had guns. To them, it was like a math equation. What would their father do if X plus Y equals Z? But the answer always seemed to be their father would never lose. The boys agreed that they would either have to kill or be killed.
So we're back to Thursday night and you're having this conversation with your brother. And do you tell him, do you share with him your opinion of what this threat to your father now means? What's going to happen?
Oh, I thought we were going to die, and I told him that after I had just gotten to the guest house. I told him that Dad's going to kill us because of what Dad said to me, and I was just sitting on the couch with my hands in my head saying, we're going to die, we're going to die, I can't believe this, I can't believe you did this.
Now, kids often say, I mean, you're familiar with kids saying, oh, my father's going to kill me, oh, my parents are going to kill me. Is that what you're talking about?
No, Dad was going to kill us. I thought for sure that Dad was going to. I couldn't believe what Lyle had done and how it was just all messed up. Everything was gone. It wasn't me going to Princeton or him coming to UCLA. It was Dad.
But what did he tell you that your father had said? Now, Lyle told you that he had threatened your father.
Mm-hmm.
What did he tell you about your father's response to the threat?
Dad said that he was going to tell everyone anyway.
I don't understand.
Dad thought that Lyle was going to tell everyone anyway, whether he touched me or not again. That's what Lyle said.
And what else did Dad tell him? Do you remember?
He told him that I don't remember the details.
Do you remember your brother testifying that your father said that you had made your choice and he had made his?
Yes.
Remember that testimony?
Yes.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, Lyle told me all about the conversation. I don't remember exactly what he told me that night versus what he testified here, but I heard all of that in the conversation.
So where did your conversation with your brother go after he had told you what had happened in the conversation with your father? What happened then?
Well, I was really panicking. I was crying and getting hysterical, and Lyle was trying to calm me down. But I would look at him, and he looked afraid, and that just got me worse, because if Lyle was afraid, I was really afraid. And so he was just saying, it's going to be okay, we'll think, don't worry about it.
The only issue was the brothers had never mentioned to any therapist or any police officer or anyone before that this was happening to them. So there was no solid evidence that this truly happened. When asked why he never told his therapist, Erik replied that he knew that his therapist was talking to his parents, sharing notes with Kitty and Jose, and he replied that they were trained for pretty much 20 years that their father ruled everything. He was a very rich and very powerful controlling man, and who'd find ways of silencing people that would probably include killing them if he had to keep his own secret.
Okay, and did you then have a conversation, as he has previously testified, about what could you do now?
Yes.
Okay. And what were the different things that you considered?
He said, we got to get out of here. We gotta leave the house and just get away.
So one of the things was to just leave the house that night.
Yes.
And did you agree or disagree with him?
Oh, I said, you're crazy. We can't go anywhere. Where are we going to go?
And well, what was your concern, if any, if you had left the house that night?
My concern?
You just learned that your brother had basically threatened to tell on your father.
Yes.
If the two of you disappeared that night, did you have in mind anything that your father might think about that?
Well, I thought Dad was going to kill us, and no matter where we went, anywhere, he was going to kill us. He obviously, my dad thought that Lyle and I were going to go tell somebody.
So if you left the house that night, what do you think your dad would have thought?
That we were going to tell.
That you had gone to tell?
I don't know if we had gone to tell that instant, but that we were definitely going to tell.
Now, in addition to talking about leaving the house that night, was there any discussion about running away permanently?
Yes, that's what he was talking about.
Okay. Well, you recall your brother testified that there were really two separate discussions, one about let's get out of here right now, and the other was what can we do to avoid this threat in the future?
Lyle was really concerned that they were going to come kill us right then. And we locked the door and we checked the outside to see if anyone was coming. And then he said, we got to leave. We got to get out of this house. And I said, well, where are we going to go? He says, we got to get away.
Okay. Now, in your mind, do you think he's talking about running away like in permanently?
Yes.
And did you agree with him? Good, let's go do that.
No, there was no chance of that.
Now, why do you think, or why did you think then there was no chance of that?
Because of things that my dad had told me and who my dad was. And there was no place in this world that my dad was going to find us with this information that I had.
On August 18, 1989, Erik said that's when he and Lyle decided to purchase handguns to protect themselves. They purchased shotguns instead because of the 2-week period for handguns. This, he said, also proved that they had not planned it that far ahead, and it was more an urgent thing than a fully planned crime. The following day, the family went on a bizarre fishing expedition, which the boat captain and crew maintained that they also believed it was strange because the family wasn't speaking to one another. They claimed that the boys seemed nervous at the bow of the boat while the parents stayed underneath in the cabin. The captain said the boys even got soaked but didn't try to get a towel or get away from the bow. Erik has said that both boys truly believed that this boat trip was some kind of way to eliminate them. Further, the boys also knew that the year prior, their mother had purchased guns and kept them in her closet. Erik claimed that she had said because she wanted to kill someone. Because they said their mother was acting weirder and weirder, they were afraid of what she could do as well. Erik also noted that that night when his parents closed the door to the den, they had never done that before, so he really thought they were planning on doing something behind closed doors. Erik went into detail about the night he and his brother burst into the den that night, saying it took about 5 seconds to end their parents' lives. He then said he ran into the den, which was illuminated only by a TV set, saw the shadow of his father standing by a coffee table, and fired. He said he believed his parents were initially firing back. He recalled that he fired first and that his brother Lyle continued firing after he had emptied his shotgun. Lyle then fired the shot to the back of his father's head, and Lyle, he said, went back outside to the car to reload and fired the final shot into their mother's face. Erik said he did not remember much except the sounds of the shotgun blast, the sound of the shattering glass, and the sound of his dying mother as she tried to crawl away. Erik said, quote, "It was a sound of pain, a sound I continually hear in my mind." He continued, "I remembered staring at my father in particular, and I just was shocked that my dad could die, and he was just sitting in front of me dead. I remember thinking how wrong this looked. As for his mother," he said, "I just wondered if she knew it was me, if she was scared. Did she understand? Was she hurting? I just felt really bad, like a bad person. I just wanted to know what she had thought when I entered that room." Erik claimed it was then that he looked for his parents' rifle and didn't see it in the den, and that's when he realized they had made a terrible mistake. Erik said that when the shooting stopped, he and his brother really didn't have a plan of what to do next. They literally just sat down in the house waiting for the police to come because they figured it was, a fancy street on Beverly Hills and the police would come right away, much like he wrote in his screenplay called Friends about kids killing their parents a year before. But as minutes passed, it became clear that they didn't hear sirens, and the brothers decided to try and establish an alibi. So they drove to a Century City movie theater, dumped the shotguns off Mulholland Drive, tossed bloody clothes in a trash bin, and drove back home. Other evidence was presented at trial which would appear the brothers may have been actually telling the truth. The defense presented over 52 witnesses, mostly all of whom attested that José and Kitty were unstable and brutal parents. One uncle even flew across the world just to testify that in the early 70s he was over the Menéndez home for a holiday. Lyle was running around and José grabbed Lyle roughly and whispered something in his ear.
We were having a family gathering. Lyle was very restless and hyperactive. He couldn't sit still, so he was kind of running. And José shouted at him, "Stop!" And apparently he didn't hear. He didn't stop. José stood up, grabbed him, and just looked at him right in the eyes and said something to him that I couldn't hear. And Lyle became incontinent at the time.
What do you mean by he became incontinent?
He wetted himself on the floor.
How did he look when this happened?
He looked pale and trembling. He looked very scared.
What happened after that?
Well, after he became incontinent, his father took him to Lyle's room, and I followed him. I entered the room and kind of yelled at him, at José's, because José was doing things that, according to myself, were way out of it. And José, in that instance, hit Lyle with his closed fist.
Where did he hit him?
On his chest or belly.
Did he seem to hit him hard?
Yes, he did.
Lyle would have been about 5 years old?
Yes.
Did Lyle cry out in any way?
I don't remember seeing him crying. He just, I don't know how, but he took it. And apparently he lost his hair or something, because he looked very pale, and that was it. I did kind of shouted at José.
Did he hit him hard, or was he just fooling around?
No, very hard. In my estimation, very hard.
So José a big man?
Big and strong.
After you witnessed him hitting Lyle like this, did you say something to José?
I gave him a good piece of my mind, and I told him that was not the way to bring up a child, to which he responded that if I didn't like that, I could leave his house, that he could raise his children as he saw fit.
Did you leave his house?
Yes, I did.
Neither of the boys ever saw this uncle ever again, and it was said that while Lyle and Erik were glad that this uncle testified for them, it was also sad for them to see. It was too late. His testimony wasn't as good as the intervention that should have happened many years prior. One female cousin testified that when he was just 8 years old, Lyle confided to her about the essay from his father.
Ms. Van der Molen, was there an incident in 1976 in which Lyle Menéndez asked you to help him?
Yes, there was.
Where did this take place?
In my bedroom downstairs in the basement.
What
in
time
Muncie.
I'm sorry.
In Muncie.
In Muncie. What time of day was it?
It was nighttime.
And what happened?
We had all been down, Lyle and Erik and I had been downstairs, and the boys had been called up to get ready for bed. I stayed and went into my bedroom, and a while later, Lyle came down, and he was asking if he could, I thought he was there to say goodnight, And he started asking me if he could sleep down there because Kathy had already gone and there was 2 single beds.
Okay, and what did you tell him?
Initially I pretty much just brushed him off because I wasn't taking him seriously.
And what happened next?
He proceeded to indicate to me by touching himself down and saying that his dad and him had been touching each other down there.
And what did he ask you to do?
He wanted to sleep down there.
And what did you do?
I went and got Kitty and brought her downstairs and told her what was going on.
How did Lyle seem this time? Was this a joke?
No, he was serious.
And what happened when Kitty came down?
She didn't believe me.
Did you tell her?
Yes, I told her what I believed to be going on, what Lyle was indicating to me. And she immediately, I don't remember that she said anything to me, just that I knew that she did not believe me. And she took Lyle and brought him back upstairs.
When you say she took him, did she physically grab him?
She took him by the arm and brought him back upstairs with her.
And did you ever discuss the incident with Lyle anymore?
No, it wasn't ever discussed after that.
Yet another male cousin named Brian Anderson also spent summers in the Menendez home, and he claimed that he would hear yelling coming from Kitty and Jose's room, and the next day, Kitty would emerge with new bruises. He also claimed to hear, quote, cries and groans coming from the boys' bedrooms at night. When he would get up to walk down the hall, Kitty would stop him and tell him he wasn't permitted to go anywhere near there. He couldn't go near the door once it was locked, not to listen and not to be near it. He also claimed that Jose would say that he was taking the boys for showers. And the cousin said he thought it was really weird at the time because they were definitely old enough to be taking their own showers alone. In rebuttal to all of this, the prosecution argued that talks of this abuse only came up after the boys were arrested. They maintained that if this level of ABUSC was really going on, the boys would have or should have reported it. The prosecution rejected the idea that those dealing with this level of abuse and control would be afraid to tell anyone. They pointed out that all of the emotions the boys were displaying on the stand was just great acting, the same way they acted during the 911 call. They called the defense's strategy the, quote, abuse excuse, or the idea that a defendant would argue that a particular history of abuse is enough to justify violent retaliation. Further, the prosecution argued that men couldn't even be raped by other men because they lack the necessary equipment.
People's position, first of all, that men cannot be raped since they lack the necessary equipment to actually be raped.
During the closing argument of both boys, the defense attorneys reminded jurors of the alleged fear that the boys were in. Toward the end of her argument, Erik's lawyer, Abramson, pointed out the fact that most likely it was Lyle who killed both parents and that Erik wouldn't bring himself, or couldn't bring himself, to shoot either of them until after his mother was dead. In the prosecution's closing argument, they theorized that because Erik was homosexual, he was able to describe these supposed encounters with his father when in fact his father was really just furious that he was gay. They even went on to say, quote, for all those children who were severely abused and who became useful members of society, this defense is an offense. Judge Weisberg gave Lyle and Erik's juries 4 choices in deciding the brothers' fate. 1, they could find the brothers guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. 2, they could find the brothers guilty of second-degree murder. 3, they could find the brothers guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Or 4, they could find the brothers guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Lyle and Erik each faced sentencing on 3 counts: the murder of Jose, the murder of Kitty, and the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. After 16 days of deliberation on January 13, 1994, Erik's jury announced that it was deadlocked and unable to reach an agreement of any of the counts. On January 25th, after deliberating for 24 days, Lyle's jury also announced that they too were deadlocked. The juries for both brothers were split down the middle exactly by gender, over whether the brothers were killers or long-suffering victims of abuse. The women believed that the boys were acting in self-defense, and the men disagreed. Judge Weisberg declared mistrials in both cases. Now, the second trial was a first-degree murder case. This time, no TV was involved, and there would only be one jury. Judge Weisberg placed severe restrictions on the testimony regarding the allegations of sexual abuse during the second trial. The jury was only permitted to deliberate on the charges of murder. Manslaughter was not permitted to be discussed. However, the defense still argued that the brothers killed out of mind-numbing, adrenaline-pumping fear that their parents would kill them for threatening to expose the family secret. They pointed out that Erik was diagnosed with PTSD due to the years of abuse he'd encountered at home. They further pointed out again that several witnesses did overhear Kitty telling the boys that they were disinherited, so this would mean the boys believed they were not in the will. Thus, the boys murdered because they felt they were in absolute danger. They also added that José caused his own death by molesting his sons and making them believe they could not escape from him, and likewise that Kitty brought about her own death by not protecting her sons and making them believe that she was an enforcer of her husband's abuse. In the end, the jury found Lyle and Erik Menendez guilty of both first-degree murder and murderous conspiracy. Interestingly, some jurors noted after the trial that if they had known about more witnesses of the SA abuse allegations, they would have never convicted the boys. Obviously, the brothers and family were upset at this ruling, but they were also pretty relieved they could have their lives spared. And frankly, after 6 years of waiting, they were glad just to have a resolution. Abramson's actions during the penalty phase were controversial due to claims that she gave defense witnesses instructions to alter notes. The brothers filed moves for a mistrial based on that, alleging misconduct and inadequate counsel, even though the district attorney's office chose not to launch a criminal investigation. Judge Weisberg sentenced the Menendez brothers to life in prison without the possibility of parole on July 2nd, 1996. The brothers also received consecutive sentences for the conspiracy charge of the murders. And with that, Lyle and Erik Menendez left their former life of privilege in Beverly Hills behind and began the difficult journey of incarceration. The California Department of Corrections put the brothers in different maximum security prisons, as is customary for high-risk offenders. Their lives significantly changed as a result of this separation, which kept them both apart from each other and the rest of the prison population. At first, Lyle Menendez was held at Mule Creek State Prison, which is notorious for its strict security protocols, and Erik was housed at Pleasant Valley Prison in California. The Menendez brothers started serving their sentences each in solitary confinement and under close supervision. Interestingly, Erik, in particular, has been quoted saying that in most ways, prison was easier than living at home because prison was more stable as to what to expect. He also said no one ever came into his cell at night attacking him like what was happening at home. For nearly 2 decades, Lyle and Erik's only means of communication were letters and the occasional phone call. They would sometimes even play chess through their letters. Throughout the years, the brothers have relentlessly tried to overturn their convictions with appeals, but each time, the California State of Appeals decided not to review the case. The decision was a major blow to the brothers' hopes in getting a new trial because it essentially upheld the appellate court's decision. Their options for appealing in the state court system were closed by this denial, so they turned to the federal courts in search of relief. The brothers filed individual habeas corpus petitions in the United States District Court as part of their ongoing quest for justice. Their hopes, however, were dashed once more on March 4th, 2003, when a magistrate judge recommended that their petitions be denied. The district court accepted the magistrate's ruling in accordance with this recommendation. Relentlessly, Erik and Lyle made the decision to take their case all the way to the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Ninth Circuit. The petitions of both brothers were denied by a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court on September 7, 2005. The judge made a significant observation that raised concerns about the fairness of the legal process in their case. During the 2 trials, the judge had actually changed many of his previous rulings. But all of that disappointment aside, the boys did get some bit of good news that they'd been hoping for decades. On April of 2018, Erik's security classification was lowered, so he was then able to be moved into the same prison as Lyle. Even still, the brothers were living in different units at the same prison until finally Erik was moved into Lyle's unit and saw him for the first time in 22 years. It was said that prison guards gave them an hour to meet face to face, and they were grateful. They cried and caught up. Now, in 2018, new evidence in the case appeared to surface. A recently discovered letter that Erik had apparently written to his cousin Andy in 1998 when he was 18 years old, just a year prior to the killings. This letter was only discovered in 2018 by José Menéndez's younger sister and therefore was not offered as evidence at either trial.
What is the new evidence? It is a letter sent by Erik Menendez to his cousin, Andy Cano, 8 months before the murder. So that would have been back in December of 1988. In that letter, it detailed his father's abuse. The letter was discovered allegedly or apparently several years ago by a family member and was never presented in court.
Now, in it, Erik says in part, "It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night, I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind."
In court papers, the brothers' attorneys argue that the new evidence indicates that José Menéndez was a violent and brutal man who would sexually abuse his children and was still molesting Erik Menéndez right before the murders. Then, on May of 2023, just last year, even more shocking evidence was brought about by someone never involved with the case or the Menendez family. A former RCA boy band member, now 51-year-old adult named Roy Rosello, claims that José Menéndez slipped him substances and RAPED him and essayed him in the Menendez home in New Jersey when he was just 14. Back then, José was indeed an RCA executive and worked with those boy bands, signing new members. In a new Peacock docuseries, the brothers said they recall seeing these boy band members often, sometimes during barbecues at their home or backstage at shows. Erik in particular says he remembers his father José taking one of the kids, saying he wanted to talk to them alone, and that they went off into the house upstairs.
Included in the petition, a signed affidavit by Roy Rosello, a former member of the boy band Menudo. He claims that he too was raped by José Menéndez, who at the time was an executive with RCA Records.
Now this explosive new information added a new angle to the case, and technically was seen as new evidence for the brothers. The brothers continued to fight using new evidence to overturn their convictions. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion on this case. This tragic tale of the Menendez brothers, which combines wealth, alleged SA, patricide, I think is one of the most important cautionary tales that any of us could ever learn from. This case also interestingly highlights how privilege can both mask and exasperate underlying issues, challenging the idea that wealth can protect people from dysfunctional family dynamics. But all the money in the world couldn't protect these boys from their father, or even from what they were raised to be. And ultimately, it also couldn't save Kitty or José from their sons retaliating on them either. This case also raises the question, if you can't tell your friends, your family, your mother, your therapist, or even the police, the sort of violence that is going on in order to try and protect yourself, who can you tell? And who is to blame when you take matters into your own hands? This case of the Menendez brothers highlights the difficulties the legal system faces when dealing with defendants who attribute their actions to abuse, which should really make everyone pause and wonder, if you were in this situation and your parents or your partner really did threaten to kill you, and they had all the power and wealth in the world, and you knew they were armed, what are your options at that point? When would your retaliation be considered self-defense? One of the arguments that the prosecution made in this case was that Kitty and José were not actually armed in the room when their sons attacked them. In fact, in the second trial, it was Erik on the stand who said that after they came in the room shooting, they realized there was no other guns in the room. and he instantly felt regret that their parents were not armed. But it has been documented time and time again that most victims do not typically attack their aggressor while the aggressor is armed or coming after them. It's actually the opposite. Instead, after years of controlling abuse, the victim is used to always kind of cowering to their abuser to minimize the attack. Then the victims will try to attack their aggressor while the aggressor's guard is down, maybe while the person is sleeping or resting, thus removing any chance to be overpowered once again by violence like they'd always been. Not to mention, when you're living in a toxic family dynamic such as this, you're living in a constant state of fear and can even imagine scenarios are truly happening when they aren't. You may always be preparing yourself for the worst. In fact, in the case of Erik, he was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, something that mostly only people exposed to extreme levels of trauma experience, many of them war veterans who often believe that someone's after them. Studies have shown that people with PTSD have abnormal levels of stress hormones, usually brought on by trauma. Normally, when people are in danger, the body produces adrenaline to give us an extra burst of energy to save ourselves. So this is a real and tangible thing that can be measured and can explain how the brothers may have actually acted out in fear of their father. Now, anyone who has grown up in that type of terrifying family environment never knows what to expect next. Maybe it's a closed-fisted gut punch when you're 5 years old, or maybe it's being dragged off the tennis court when you're 18 years old in front of hundreds of people. These are the types of really serious personal wars against these children, and attacks brought on by abusers that can slowly and systematically dismantle a human life. And as such, many therapists have pointed out that perhaps the spending sprees of the brothers could point out the fact that it was the first time they had ever experienced any sort of control over their own lives. Interestingly, all of these years later, despite the fact that the defense didn't want cameras in the courtroom, the recorded testimony of the brothers and information on the Menendez case has really taken social media by storm nowadays. It's almost as if society wasn't ready to judge this case properly back then, because nowadays social media has really made us all very aware of the red flags surrounding emotional and physical abuse, narcissistic abuse, SA and DV. Now, these really are such complicated topics to begin with, but now younger generations are looking at this case with fresh eyes. It is especially interesting that social media has been not only a tool to share more evidence on this case, but it's also sort of being used as a vehicle to start a justice movement. Now, personally speaking, I actually do believe the brothers are telling the truth about the SA and the abuse. It's not just their raw emotions in court, which are very difficult to be faked to that level, but it's really all of the witness testimony for me, especially this news story from the boy band member. Also, knowing what I know about other stories of familial violence, their stories of abuse, even up to the retaliation portion, actually do match up with many other DV victims. Now, in 1993, this type of family abuse had never been heard by most people. It was extremely rare to hear about anything like this publicly. Many people believe that it was so over the top that the boys had to be lying. I mean, these boys were literally hysterically crying for all the world to see and criticize. Then they were actually ridiculed for doing so, and they knew they were being ridiculed by some of their idols on TV. In fact, the boys were becoming a national mockery. Saturday Night Live did a skit, and many late-night comedians weaved the resentment of the brothers into their opening acts. I think that speaking out about these things and getting ridiculed was probably one of the more difficult things they'd ever faced in their lives, as they had kept that secret for so long. It's what they were so worried about. But as bad as the public ridicule was, it probably wasn't anything like realizing it was their own mother who wouldn't protect them against these attacks. What I find most interesting about this case, whether they told the truth or not really, is the fact that these brothers telling these alleged stories has actually helped millions and millions of people cope with the same sort of trauma, and perhaps even helped millions of other people break the cycle of abuse and get out of their situations. These boys risked being ridiculed, and now so many people have the strength through them, to be honest about telling their own stories. It's as if some people thought to themselves, okay, if these brothers can go through this and do this for all the world to see, maybe my situation isn't all that abnormal. Maybe I need to do something. Maybe I'm strong enough to tell these stories to others. In fact, I will even go further, and I'll suggest that it was Erik and Lyle who single-handedly triggered a societal shift, and it's now taken 30 years to evolve that people are finally ready to hear and believe their story. Because now so many people are looking back and wondering if they really got it wrong. And as Lyle has pointed out, this case was before the priest scandals, before the coach scandals, before Megan's Law, which required law enforcement to provide public info on sex offenders. It was before the Me Too movement, and happened at a time when Bill Cosby was still the, kind Bill Cosby that we knew. None of these things had yet happened in history, thus the raw story wasn't believed to be real at the time. I think one of the most important things to take from this story is the fact that it was proven that José was overbearing, and Kitty, perhaps abused herself as a child, knew nothing but to enable her abuser. Now, do I think the brothers should be released? I don't know. I mean, obviously they brutally killed their parents, but I'm not really sure. Is it really their own parents that were the only people they would ever go after because of years and years of abuse? Or is it that years and years of abuse actually destroyed these men to the point that they're actually sociopaths now? I will say I was a little bothered over the fact that the second trial had completely different rulings from the judge, one of which really minimized the testimonies of the abuse. In fact, it was said that afterwards, some of the jury members felt that they wouldn't have chosen that way if they had known from more witnesses that it were true. I think that 30 years later, it might be worth taking another look at everything again, especially looking at what just happened with the Gypsy Rose case. She was released with time served for killing her mother, who was proven to be pretty abusive in holding her prisoner. That would be my answer, that I do believe they probably deserve a new trial. But what do you guys think? Are these brothers criminals, or are they survivors? Personally, I think that although José was a determined and brilliant man who succeeded at nearly everything he tried, I would argue that he did not succeed of reaching the American dream. While he made his family extremely wealthy, he failed to realize one cannot reach the American dream if they are withholding mobility, freedom, and equality within their own walls. That level of control does not lead your bloodline to success. If you're hell-bent on being a tyrant, your home is the opposite of a democracy. You're poisoning their future, the future of your bloodline, which may potentially cause your own demise. But perhaps it's close to what Lyle said to Dr. Oziel soon after the killings took place. At least their father would have been proud about one thing, that their sons finally took control over a situation when they felt fear. And that is all I have for today. If you got any value out of this video, please subscribe. I'd be so grateful. Thank you so much for watching. Be careful out there.